very much for joining us to celebrate Bede. I think the greatest person who ever lived. I'm just slightly obsessed. Has everyone here heard of Bede? Hands up if you've heard of the Venerable Bede. Fantastic,
No,
wonderful, as it should be. So for those who don't know much about him, in his own words, Bede was a servant of Christ, a priest, a monk, singer, reader, teacher, writer, exegete, hagiographer, historian, martyrologist, hymnographer, epigrapher, scientist, computist, grammarian, and rhetorician. And we tend to also add editor of the Bible and potentially vernacular poet to that list. He was born on land owned by the monastery of St. Peter's, Wearmouth, which is in modern-day Sunderland, up the Black Cats, around the time the monastery was founded in around sort of the early to mid 670s, and he died in 735 at what was then the twin monastery of Wearmouth Jarrow, I guess up the Bagpies as well. He entered Wearmouth as an oblate at the age of 7, but he spent some of his formation under Ceolfrith, the abbot at Jarrow on the Tyne. His works, particularly his biblical exegesis and the long computistical treatise De Temporum Ratione, became medieval bestsellers and were transmitted throughout the Middle Ages. His exegesis and his homilies became the basis of much of the later homiletic tradition and eventually the Glossa Ordinaria. Bede is still a cornerstone of scholarship and worship to this day. For historians, his ecclesiastical history remains a hugely important source for England's earliest years. And just recently, Arvo Pärt put a quote from his Apocalypse commentary to music. It's called Morning Star. There is a QR code just there if you would like to listen to it on YouTube and Spotify. He was very much the product of his monastery. Wearmouth Jarrow was founded by a man called Benedict Biscop, and at the time, the newly converted England had very few libraries on its own soil. Through trips to Rome and to Gaul, Biscop and his successors built one of the largest libraries in Western Europe at the time. Michael Lappage thinks they had over 200 titles there, and he also thinks it was probably the largest library that was put together before the Norman conquest in England. Bede was very much a man born in the right place at the right time. He was a massive nerd and a massive library, and I think many of us can relate to that. One generation earlier, or with a less visionary abbot, would he have lacked the resources to reach the potential we know he reached? So I'm going to take us through some of the Bodleian's Bede manuscripts and some of their notations from the 8th century to the 16th. Through these manuscripts, we can see how the vision and energy of a small group of committed educators in the northeast of England, which is the best part of the world, can ripple through millennia of European and global history. And we're going to start right at the epicenter at Wearmouth Jarrow with Bodley 819. It's the oldest copy of Bede's commentary on the Book of Proverbs. Richard Gamerson has dated it to between 717 and 758 on paleographical grounds. The text in the manuscript is incomplete, but we do have glossing in the hand of Aldred, who was the Lindisfarne Gospels glossator, so this is a true relic of Northumbria. We have letters surviving from continental missionaries to leaders in the Northumbrian church who were asking for works of Bede in the 8th century to help their missions and monasteries. And Boniface of Fulda, of notorious chopping down an oak and then getting chopped down himself fame, he actually asked for a copy of the Book of Proverbs when he wrote, so probably not this actual book, but still it's lovely to have the link. Both Malcolm Parkes and David Danville have argued that the period around and after Bede's death was a demanding time for the copyists of Bede's work, and this caused the Wearmouth Jarrow scriptorium to transition away from its more sort of uncial, Italian-focused style of script towards something that was a bit quicker and easier to do, which is the insular minuscule that you can see right there. But Richard Gamerson's noted that this manuscript has both scripts, and with the biblical lemata from Proverbs in capitular uncial and the commentary in the insular minuscule, and to him it shows that the community was adapting to this demand because the new script was compact enough that you could carry it to, say, the continent. Okay, we're going to move on to another century now and talk a bit about the Carolingian Renaissance. This is MS Laud Misc 159. This manuscript has been dated to the second quarter of the 9th century. It's been attributed to Lorsch, which was a major learning centre of the Carolingian Renaissance. The manuscript is a collection of writings on the Octateuch, which is the first 8 books of the Bible, and it includes parts of Bede's Genesis commentary. Bede's writings became influential in the Carolingian Renaissance. We have manuscripts surviving of his work from this period Authors do show a debt to him. For example, Zachary Giuliano has noted just how influential he was on Paul the Deacon's Familiary. Many of his works arrived on the continent through the missionaries, as I've said, but also possibly through Alcuin, who was Charlemagne's court councillor at Aachen, head of the school at Tours, but also, very importantly, a Northumbrian, who was educated at the School of York by Echbert, who was a close friend and mentoree of Bede, and who received his crotchety old man letter, the letter to Bishop Echbert shortly before Bede died. So, as we are short for time, we must move on to later 9th and 10th century, and the vernacular translation of Bede's ecclesiastical history. So in the 9th century, scholars in Mercia and Wessex were translating various patristic texts into Old English, including works by Gregory the Great and Augustine. We also have the Historia Ecclesiastica on this list, exactly where it should be. It was abridged and translated into Old English, probably in Mercia. And this is a facsimile of Tanna 10, which is here in the Bodleian. It's an important early witness to the text, late 9th, early 10th century. As much as Bede loved Latin, we also know that on his deathbed he translated John into Old English. We are told that he was learned in vernacular verse, and he praised various members of the Anglo-Saxon royal families for hiring people who spoke English to talk to the English. So I think he probably would have appreciated the fact that it was translated, even if he'd been quite salty that it had to be translated in the first place. We can see quite a bit of engagement with this manuscript, including all the way to the 16th century. As you can see there is, I think, a pen trial in an early modern hand, and at certain points in this manuscript, and I do invite you to go and find it like a treasure hunt. Someone does doodle themselves in early modern dress, including with pantaloons, so I do urge you all to look at the facsimile online and find the pantaloons. Okay, now this is one of my favourites. I love this. It's so small, it's so beautiful. This is Digby 112, which is an early to mid 12th century collection of saints' lives in Proto-Gothic script. The provenance is probably English, and it contains the only copy of what's known as the composite life of Ceolfrith. So when Bede was writing the history of his own monastery, roughly around the same time someone else was writing a history of one of the abbots, and that only survives in 2 manuscripts. This is one of them, and it's been spliced together, which is very interesting. So Richard Jameson and Carley have suggested that this manuscript came from Glastonbury, but other people like Michael Lapidge have suggested it was Winchester. They both make these arguments on the basis of the saints that are included, some Winchester saints, some Glastonbury saints. But in 1129, the abbot of Glastonbury was Henry of Blois, who became Bishop of Winchester, and he held both positions simultaneously. And I think that maybe Henry has something to do with the fact that there are manuscript choirs from seemingly both of these places at around the time when he was probably abbot and bishop that have somehow magically ended up in manuscript together. I think he's probably the culprit in some way. But I also think he may have had these 2 Weymouth Jarrow texts put together. Both Ceolfrith and Henry were royal abbots who were overseeing ecclesiastical communities that were split on different sites. So you can see that all the way through there are interpolations about being an abbot of 2 monasteries. But also, if you look at some of the dry points, there's a very interesting dry point cross just there that's highlighting all of the relics that the Weymouth Jarrow abbots brought back from Rome. This is something that Henry did, and you can also see this kind of engagement with building works, libraries, and patronising the arts, which is all something that he did. And I wonder if he was actually looking for a bit of historical support and guidance from Weymouth Jarrow as he went on to become the most powerful person in the Church in England in his time. And you can make the argument that that's what Biscop was in Northumbria, I think. So we're moving now on to the Glossa Ordinaria and a fun little end. So this is MS Laud Lat 115. This manuscript contains the Chronicles, the Prayer of Manasseh, and Ezra Nehemiah with the Glossa Ordinaria. We think it was produced around 1200 in France, but it ended up in Würzburg. In the 12th century, Bede's commentaries did become interpolated into the Glossa Ordinaria, and Leslie Smith has placed Bede in its core circle of sources, alongside Ambrose, Augustine, and other patristic authors, and as much as Bede would have protested that he wasn't worthy, I'm sure he would be thrilled. Much of the gloss's material on Ezra and Nehemiah, the Catholic epistles, Genesis, Luke, and other books come from Bede, and I'm leaving you with one of my favourite passages. So Bede talks about Christians who really try to live very good lives, but fail miserably. But they try. And he compares them to donkeys in the book of Ezra. And sometimes when I do bad things that I don't want to do, and I feel bad about them, I think, oh, Bede's going to be so disappointed I'm a donkey again. So in conclusion, read Bede, succeed, and yay books.
Just one thing. Did you want to say something on the...
Yes, actually, if we have a little bit of time, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the lovely choir signatures with the little leaves there, which are very nicely late antique. So if anyone wants to have a look, I think they're very pretty. They're lovely flourishes in that manuscript. You can see them online. It's an absolute unit of a beautiful manuscript there.
Thank you for your enthusiasm and scholarship. Enthusiasm not just for Bede, but for Northumberland. Wonderful place.
As it rightly should be.
You're all very welcome to come and have a closer look. I think you're welcome to turn the page.